name is Sinner.
I am Sinner, the poet. Tear him for his bad verses. I am not Sinner, the conspirator.
In the play Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, there is a scene where a baying mob murder a man purely because he has the same name as one of Caesar's conspirators, Cinna. When he tries to placate his aggressors by pointing out that he is nothing more than a poet, their taste for blood is so great that they decide to kill him for his poetry.
Tear him to pieces! He's a conspirator! He's a conspirator!
No, I'm Sinner the poet! I'm Sinner the poet!
Tear him for his bad verses.
There is a lot written about William Shakespeare, but I don't think anyone could deny that he really knows people.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it.
Mary Whitehouse was a British teacher and conservative activist who campaigned against what she saw as an increasingly permissive culture.
I just wanted to say to you that your children and your family are very much at risk, particularly at this time, from video nasties, from media violence, from pornography, and even, could be, from cable television.
She took issue with the violence that she saw in TV shows such as Doctor Who, and the sexualised nature of Benny Hill's comedy, and the blasphemy in Dennis Potter's Son of Man. She was basically the embodiment of that running joke from The Simpsons.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
She saw no line between these acts happening in a work of fiction and them happening in real life.
The concern that we have is shared by the vast majority of people, that I believe absolutely to be
true. And
yet,
I mean, if you work in television at all, if you work in newspapers, you get hundreds of letters from people saying, in effect, who does she think she is?
The Video Nasties were a list of 72 horror movies which were released on video in the UK and caused something of a moral panic. Mary Whitehouse was particularly vocal about getting these films removed from circulation.
I have never seen a video nasty. I wouldn't. I have far too much.
But how can you judge on a video nasty?
Oh,
Have you never seen one?
Look, if somebody tells me, as we get these reports in from Europe, from America, and from this country, that a particular video nasty contains that, and that, I actually don't need to see visually what I know is in that film.
She was a joke. Despite her abilities to gain column inches, her name was a punchline. There was even a sketch show on the BBC called The Mary Whitehouse Experience, as it was filled with exactly the sort of material that would offend her.
Throughout this series, we have had complaints about swearing. So from now on, we will employ specific code words. So when we say chuff or chuffing, we mean the F word. And for the C word, we will use the phrase Henry Kelly.
Although this may lead to some confusion in, for example, the sentence, Henry Kelly, what a Henry Kelly!
I was too old for Harry Potter when it first came out, and the book release passed me by without note, until people started to protest it.
Here in Nashville, they threw books like Harry Potter and Twilight into the fire.
So tonight is the demonic standoff, and so my wife's going to pray, and when she says amen, we're going to slip out right over here, give us kind of a second to get ahead of a little bit, and then we're going to get started. And it's going to be beautiful. And God's going to be glorified. And people are going to be set free. Hallelujah.
This was mainly the religious right condemning the use of witchcraft in children's literature.
And while I'm on the subject, let me say something about Harry Potter. Warlocks are enemies of God. And I don't care what kind of hero they are. They're an enemy of God. And had it been in the Old Testament, Harry Potter would have been put to death.
This didn't really harm the sales of Rowling's books. If anything, people had to buy more copies in order to burn them. But none of these fundamentalists seemed to stop to think about the optics of what they were doing, and parallels were made between them and other famous book burners.
Maybe it'd be a good time to remind everyone, if we're going to be in the business of book burning, let's make sure we're burning the right books. Of course, book burning is a somewhat inflammatory gesture, one not to be encouraged. I understand that the writer of this book is worshipped by many trans-exclusionary radical fascists. This dangerous tome, authored by an obsessed bigot who needs a new hobby, is in homes all over the world. The burning question is, won't somebody think of the children?
which is why it was all the more surprising to see, years later, left-wing LGBTQ activists feeding the same books into fires because the author doesn't agree with the exact same parameters they use to define gender.
JK Rowling's anti-trans arguments all seem to boil down to a belief that trans women as a group of people are dangerous and pose a risk to cis women's safety in public spaces, something that there is no evidence for.
I'd like to be clear that as far as I'm aware, Jamie, who is the host of the Jamie Dodger YouTube channel, hasn't done any book burning. The clip used here is to illustrate how the tides have changed for JK Rowling.
She said, "Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who will have you live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real."
So you find that bigoted? What do you find about
it? It was deemed transphobic. I myself.
Do you find that transphobic yourself?
I don't really have an opinion on it, but I'm just going with what a lot of other people have said.
So let's pause it. Let's not go with what other people are saying. Let's try and learn how to critically think.
The second backlash to JK Rowling attacked her personally, and through its persistence it has leaked into the mainstream. This is an advertisement for the New York Times newspaper, which played in American subways.
Quote, "I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth."
Rowling is too big to cancel. Her worst-selling books outsell most authors' hits. So it's in the publishing industry's interest to ignore the mob calling for her work to be removed from print.
Some of the voices who've been critical include the stars of her own movie, including the biggest star, Daniel Radcliffe.
That's right. Harry Potter himself responded, posting a blog post, an essay on a site called the Trevor Project website, and that's a nonprofit agency that supports LGBTQ youth. And in that statement, he wrote, "Transgender women are women. Any statement to the contrary erases the identity and dignity of transgender people and goes against all advice given by professional healthcare associations who have far more expertise on this matter than either Joe or I." He also added that he hopes her comments don't tarnish the experience that fans have had with her books and the movies.
This backlash, while it has not stopped Rowling from working, has tarnished her legacy for many, as her name is now linked to the trans topic as much as it is to Harry Potter. I entered the words JK Rowling into Google just a moment ago, and the first thing that came up, after Wikipedia and her own website, were 4 news stories, all trans related. It's like the publishing industry wants to wag their finger and tut at her, while still raking in the cash from her ever popular book sales.
Do you think it's fair that that she's being attacked by a large group of people and people are calling her, like you said at the beginning of this conversation, you said, given the fact that JK Rowling is transphobic, how do you feel about Harry Potter? Now, retroactively looking at that statement, do you think that was the best way to phrase?
No, I feel like an idiot now.
In both the case of Mary Whitehouse and JK Rowling, the mobs were ignored. But let's look at an occasion when they were acquiesced to.
There is the reports are that having done the initial shoot and having looked at the reaction to, on the one hand, BVS Dodgers, no one's calling it, and on the other hand, Wonder Woman, it was decided that when they were doing reshoots, they should get some more levity, some more jokes, some more humour into the film, because that was clearly what audiences wanted. What audiences didn't want was, super dark, super sombre. This is actually nonsense, because, as Wonder Woman and The Dark Knight proved, you can have, the Nolan Dark Knight movies are really dark and they're really great. Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman movie is really colourful and it's really great. The thing about them is that they're both really good films. This is neither dark nor light, it is just absolute rubbish.
The Justice League was the third film to be directed by Zack Snyder in the cinematic DC superhero franchise. But due to the poor performance of some of the films which preceded it, and Warner Brothers' competition with Disney's Marvel franchise caused the producers to doubt their auteur. Snyder used a then recent bereavement to duck out of the project and was replaced by Joss Whedon, who re-edited the film, losing over an hour of footage and then directed reshoots. The reviews of the finished film were, at best, mixed.
This movie was supposed to be something like 2 hours, 45 minutes, and it was recently sliced down to be 2 hours. Or I think it was the mandate was less than 2 hours. So it clocks in at like an hour, 59 minutes. And it does show, especially in the first act of the movie, this setup, you can tell it's like there's supposed to be so much more information here. Even going into the second act of the movie, though, it's more noticeable in the first act. There's even one scene where it's just like, it's done now. You're like, oh, okay, something's missing, isn't there?
Cries for a director's cut were pretty much immediate, but the powers that be at Warner Brothers were too busy to take much note. That was until 2020, the year of the global pandemic which forced the world to live online. And that is when the Release the Snyder Cut campaign was taken note of, and eventually yielded to. Snyder was rehired and given a budget of $70 million to re-edit and redo the special effects. Zack Snyder went crazy with his newfound creative control, making a new cut which ran a full 4 hours, with the matting removed so it was in 4:3 aspect ratio, with updated special effects, additional scenes, and for a while it was rumoured to be released in black and white, something that Snyder later reconsidered, but only after releasing a monochrome trailer. And the reviews were better.
The Rise of Skywalker was a butchered mess. Zack Snyder's cut of the Justice League is an unbutchered mess.
That's true. That's true.
On the whole, the fans were satisfied with the redux, but it instilled something of a bad habit in the mind of a large section of the viewing public. That being that if they demanded it enough, Warner Brothers will do what they want.
This is making headlines this morning. Warner Brothers is actually pulling the plug on the latest movie, the highly anticipated DC Comics film, Batgirl. It's not going to be released.
Mitch, this is what I would call a DC disaster. Batgirl was completed and post-production already started. In fact, it was in the middle of doing test screenings with audiences in anticipation for this year's big debut. It was being pegged as one of the most expensive cinematic cast-offs ever. Unfortunately, those test screenings were so poorly received by moviegoers that Warner Brothers decided to cut ties with the project to keep the brand's name intact.
Despite the promise of seeing Michael Keaton return to the Batman role, which only subsequently happened in the Flash movie, and the recent Oscar winner Brendan Fraser in a villain role, the movie was junked.
And my last question for the both of you is, what's next for you two?
Batgirl. Oh.
Here's hoping.
Regardless of reports of the film being awful, the campaign for Batgirl's release started immediately.
After its decision behind Warner Brothers' Batgirl, the studio is shelving another one of its anticipated films. Warner's no longer plans to release Coyote vs. Acme, a live-action CG animation hybrid that completed principal photography last year in New Mexico. The animated feature was greenlit as an HBO Max film before being considered for a theatrical release. The feature, which sources believe cost around $72 million to make, had key Warner's talent involved in front of the camera and behind the scenes.
Coyote vs. Acme, on the other hand, was said to be very funny, but it too was removed from the release schedule.
Writing on social media, Forte began. To the cast and crew of Coyote vs. Acme, I know that a lot of you haven't gotten a chance to see our movie, and sadly it's looking like you never will. When I first heard that our movie was getting deleted, I hadn't seen it yet, so I was thinking what everyone else must have been thinking. This thing must be a hunk of junk. But then I saw it, and it's incredible. Forte continued, super funny throughout, visually stunning, sweet, sincere, and emotionally resonant in a very earned way. As the credits rolled, I just sat there thinking how lucky I was to be a part of something so special. That quickly turned to confusion and frustration. This was the movie they're not going to release?
The campaign to put the movie in cinemas started right away.
I hate to be political, but release Coyote vs. Acme!
But Warner Brothers will not yield on this occasion because 1. Who wants to be pressured by a mob? And 2. These films have been written off against tax. Whereas Justice League was not, because it was released, albeit in a different form. If these films were to be released, Warner Brothers would have to pay one hell of a lot of money, but also have to face a sea of armchair critics, not necessarily me, but you know the sort, taunting them with you were wrong if the movies were good, or you shouldn't have bothered if they were bad, and quite frankly, sod that for a game of soldiers.
I mean, yes, once you give a film to the people in the world, yeah, it's open season to criticize it or praise it or whatever you want. But this didn't even really get a fair shake. And that's, that's disappointing for obvious reasons, but moreover because little girls are going to have to wait longer now before they can see a Batgirl who they can identify that says, hey, she looks just like me too.
I understand this mindset because not being able to see something makes it all the more tempting. I personally would love to see that Netflix Gore Vidal movie that's not coming out anytime soon. Brendan Fraser said something interesting in that clip. Once you give a film to the world, it is open season to criticise it. And I agree with that, because how can you tell quality without context?
Gotta go fast.
When the first trailer for the Sonic the Hedgehog movie was released, there was an instant backlash because of the main character's design, many complaining that it falls into the uncanny valley. In response to the criticism, the movie was pushed back from November 2019 to February 2020 in order that the special effects could be redone. And to be fair, the cartoon-like design of the character did work with the movie's tone. The film was a hit and to date has spawned 2 more sequels. But I think the demanded redesign fitting in with the movie is just luck in this case.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest of them all?
Famed is thy beauty, majesty. But a lovely maiden I now behold.
At the time of recording, Disney's live-action remake of Snow White is still unreleased, having had the release date pushed back a full year to accommodate reshoots.
The fan reaction was insane. We didn't even see what they were clapping for. I think it was good. I don't know.
Sizzle.
Yeah.
We didn't see anything. We're still waiting.
In effort to update an 1812 German fairy tale for modern audiences, Disney allegedly removed the dwarf characters from their remake for sensitivity reasons, and replaced them with a merry band of misfits. There was a public outcry, which wasn't helped by the movie's star sharing her thoughts on the source material, which the movie's key demographic most likely loved, and she did not. The movie became a soft target for internet critics. Again, not me, but you know the sort. And these grown adults destroyed a film aimed at 10-year-old girls that they hadn't seen, because the star was a bit annoying.
Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. Oh wait, sorry. Snow White and the 7 magical, diverse, gender, non-conforming, vertically challenged creatures.
Thank you!
There were rewrites and more than one session of reshoots, the budget ballooning to an approximate $400 million. The merry band of misfits were replaced with CGI dwarfs that looked somewhere between garden gnomes and Toby Jugs. And what has this achieved? Well, the film hasn't come out yet, so I can't say for sure, but it hasn't done anything for raising people's expectations. The online movie review world is adamant that they're going to hate this film so much that I'm not sure why they bothered changing it.
At the time of making this video, the trailer has over 3 million views with 15,000 likes and 178,000 dislikes.
I gotta pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
Honestly, the comments section is pure gold, man.
I'd just like to repeat, this is a film that no one has seen yet. Now I have to admit it doesn't look like my sort of thing in any version. But that might be because I'm in my 40s. But if I were to watch this movie, and I probably won't, I think I'd rather see the original one. The one with these guys in it. Because that's different. And it's not just a reskinned version of what I saw as a child. But I don't get to see that now. Thanks.
Stop editing movies because of how we feel about things in the present. To destroy a piece of film history, a classic, it's horrifying to me that we're allowing morons to dictate what we can and can't see. It assumes that you are not intelligent enough to process what you're seeing. We are bowing to morons and idiots.
What Chris Gore is talking about here is something that also boils my piss. The re-editing of old movies so they align with modern values. It was announced at the beginning of this year that Crocodile Dundee would be edited for its forthcoming 4K release, to remove a scene where Mick Dundee physically checks between the legs of a person who is identified as a cross-dresser.
I've been trying to tell you all night, that girl, she's a guy. A man dressed up as a girl. No!
Should people do this in real life? No. Is it brash and disrespectful? Yep. And is it in character? Yes, it is. People are imperfect, and that should be reflected in drama, or comedy in this case. Mick Dundee is from a rural place in a foreign land. He's not familiar with the ways of New York City, and that leads him to cross a line. Paul Hogan, the star of this movie, has approved the edits, but the movie's director, Peter Fairman, has said, quote, "It doesn't necessarily serve anyone to entirely erase history," unquote. Hogan's co-writers on the film have made no comment.
Strange creatures, women.
Well, can't stand around all
I
day.
knew one once. Striking looking girl, tall, you know.
This is a scene from the John Cleese sitcom Fawlty Towers, which got the episode removed from streaming for a short while. In this episode, called The Germans, which is largely considered to be the show's best, the Major, the old-fashioned long-term resident of the hotel, drops a couple of ethnic slurs when recounting an anecdote about taking a date to see the cricket. Basil rolls his eyes as he's forced to humour the old bigot. But because of the use of what I'm going to call the N-bomb, it was removed from BBC's iPlayer and BritBox, a mere 45 years after its first broadcast. The scene was later edited out before the episode was reinstated. But the scene is important to the story, as it adds dramatic irony to the end of the episode, where after a knock on the head, John Cleese starts goose-stepping in front of some German guests. He has become the old bigot that he rolled his eyes at.
I want to ask you, there are people out there who, having heard your views, would consider them to be old-fashioned and not taking into consideration the feelings of people who have been hurt by some of these comments. And I want to give you the example, for instance, in Britain, where racist behaviour, for instance, was couched as a bit of banter. Is that acceptable, in your view, as a joke?
I think it's a very poor question.
I'd like you to answer it.
Well, it's hard because it's so scattered and it has so many different ideas in it, and I don't know which place to start with to answer it. What I've said is the important thing is that people are protected to the right degree, not overprotected and not underprotected. So the question becomes, what is the right degree? Now, the practitioners of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very successful therapy, which is used a lot to treat depression and anxiety in young people, say that the woke ideas are pretty much the opposite of what they use to make people less depressed and anxious. Now, it doesn't matter whether that's old-fashioned or new-fashioned or even from the early 12th century. That is a very interesting idea and needs to be explored without using these emotional terms like people being hurt and all this kind of thing. Let's try to be a little bit more calm about it and use less emotionally loaded words.
It has become a cliche to compare present day with the George Orwell novel 1984, but in that book it is Winston Smith's job to rewrite the history book so they align with the present. When chocolate rations are reduced from 30 grams a week to 25, the Ministry of Truth puts out the claim that it has increased to 25 grams, and it is Winston Smith's job to make sure the history books align with that message.
In honour of this massive overfulfillment of the 9th three-year plan, it has been announced that the chocolate ration is to be increased to 25 grams per week.
An artist deciding to bring out a new version of an old work is one thing, but to have your work effectively censored by someone else is another. I am reminded of Abel Ferreira's words after seeing the cuts made to Bad Lieutenant.
You know, no one should be sitting there recutting my movie. If I was the government, if I had a problem with the Bad Lieutenant, then you should just ban the Bad Lieutenant.
Now, I don't have anything against protest in general.
The last time Netflix brought this many trans people together, it was for a protest, so...
But I can't think of a time when a mob made anything other than a mess.
He's a conspirator! He's a conspirator!
No, I'm Sinner the poet! I'm Sinner the poet!
Tear him for his bad verses!
No, I'm not!
Tear him for his
I'm not a conspirator!
It is no matter, it's like
For the pedants of YouTube, I should point out that I am aware that some of these groups I'm referring to as mobs are not real-world mobs, but more like online campaigns. And when it comes to political change, I can see why both would be necessary. But when it comes to art, you're best off ignoring the noise and making what you want. Which is what I am doing. I'm making another short film on 16mm, which costs a lot, so if you enjoyed this or any of my other content, you can show your appreciation by sending me the price of a cup of coffee, or more, via Ko-Fi. There is a link in the description of this video, and thanks in advance. I'm Scott Kingsnorth, and I'm making a movie.